Do you ever come across somebody who has a wake behind them of people who are better off? That's my favorite way of describing, I think, my guest today. His name is Brian Hoppe. He is an executive and strategic coach for MSPs. He has a finance background, MSP background. You'll hear all about that kind of stuff. But I actually found this guy on, I think we met on LinkedIn and we had like one of those virtual chats or something. But his name kept coming up because all of my most successful clients were also clients of his. And so I reached out to him and realized, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but it's working and I want to know more about it. And that led to us scheduling the interview for today's podcast episode. We start the conversation about pricing and packaging, and then it turns into a little bit of a finance conversation, but all through the lens of selling and packaging your product well. So especially if you are like in an evolution of any kind of how you want to make more money in your MSP, this conversation I think is going to be super, super helpful for you. Hopefully you can tell the two Brians apart, and I'll get out of the way. Let's do it. Brian Hoppe, thanks for being here with me, man.
Well, thanks, Brian Gillette. We got two Brians, the best, and the best spelling as well. So.
Yeah, the right spelling of Brian. That'd be hilarious if we referred to each other as our full first and last names this whole interview. We were just talking a little bit before we jumped on the recording, and we were starting to get into some juicy stuff, so I decided to save it for a hot mic. But I'm really glad you're here because you to me represent sort of this magical in-between land in the MSP landscape between, there's all of these like operations / service delivery resources out there. Mm-hmm. And then there's guys like me who are like how you sell all of it, who have like no real formal technical knowledge. And then there's guys like you in the middle where you're you create this like holy trinity between those two extremes where you're helping MSPs actually do something with the technical stuff and ground all of the sales and marketing stuff all in service of making a business more profitable. So even though I basically just explained what you do, why don't you tell the people, why don't you tell the nations who are listening to this podcast a little bit about just kind of who you are and what you're doing right now for MSPs?
Great. Yeah. Thanks for teeing that up. And, magical, I don't know that I've ever been called magical before, but I guess I'll take it. I don't know. But no, it's an interesting and different thing than I think a lot of people are doing. So, I come from the background of an MSP owner, right? So I've been in the shoes of all the people that I serve. And I think that's that's a relatively unique space as well. But yeah, so I sold my MSP a few years back, and then subsequent to that, worked for the buyer for a little while, and then decided, hey, it's time for me to jump out there and see where I can help in a lot of the ways that I have been helped along the way when I was learning how to do this thing. And so yeah, I think I kind of am in the space of where I guess strategy and leadership and running a financially successful MSP come together. And those are a lot of the things that I work on with my clients, as well as working on themselves as leaders, because I still, I think it's extremely hard for your MSP to go further than you have as a leader, as an individual, as an owner. And so you've got to grow in order for your MSP to grow. Otherwise, you're going to end up pretty stagnant and kind of in a space where it's like, man, I don't know why I'm not getting to the next level. And so,
right.
Not sure if that's the exact question you asked, but that's kind of what I had to say.
That's fantastic because I just want to dive straight into something you talked about, like a financially successful MSP is like, it means you have to know how to sell and get customers, but you also have to know how to deliver that service efficiently and profitably. But how? Let me just ask it this way: as a guy who built an MSP that somebody was willing to buy, you had to have figured out something about running an MSP profitably. Tell me how that came about, if you don't mind. Like what was the journey for you of running an MSP, and then maybe even a little bit of the story of like the decision to sell the MSP and what that was like, or if there was lessons that you had to learn along the way to become more like of a fiscally viable acquisition target.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and a lot of that experience came from buying MSPs as well, right? So knowing what a buyer is looking for. But yeah, I mean, I'll kind of back up a good bit for the part of the story. Part of my story is I was on a leadership team of an MSP that I did not own. I was kind of the second guy in there. We had built it to like maybe 15 or so people. We were in a place where we were like, okay, what do we do with this thing? Like, what's the right way to grow it? What's the right way to move it forward? We ended up doing three things, and I can only tell this now, like in retrospect. First thing that we did was we joined a peer group, right? An MSP specific industry peer group. That was a really big thing for us, seeing what other people are doing, learning from people who have gone before. As part of that, we also got a lot of insight specifically from service leadership, who does benchmarking on the industry. Thousands of IT providers put in their numbers every quarter. So you can see what other people are doing on key metrics. That was a huge part of my financial learning. I eventually was CFO of that MSP, so I have a relatively heavy finance background now as well. And so back to the three things. So first one was peer groups. Second one, we implemented EOS, or business operating system. That was key for us. And the third thing is that we got an executive coach for each of us on the leadership team. That last piece was like profound for me, not only as in business, but also personally, that at the time I was like, okay, I'm going to do this one day. This is something I'm going to do one day. Now, it took about 10 years in a long journey between then and when I actually started doing what I'm doing now, but that is what I do now. And so those three things were like big, I guess, catalysts. And then, and what enabled us probably, the approximate numbers are we approximately tripled from 15 people to 45 people in like somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 years after kind of doing those things. And so that was a big piece of things. I exited that in 2015, 2016. I bought into a small MSP and then subsequently did another acquisition and ended up selling that, end of 2021. And so a lot of learnings in there. We were buying MSPs. So we did a lot of looking into the numbers, understanding the operations, what makes a good MSP, what makes a not good target, what do you need to have in place in order to, get the highest multiple, what do the right numbers look like as far as what a buyer's looking for. And so a lot of that education came from, oh, hey, we're actually doing this and knowing what we want to see. And so that really enabled me to tee my MSP up pretty well for an exit as well.
So I want to ask you a question, Brian. As you were evaluating these MSPs for purchase, and you've coached, I don't know how many MSPs, like you might have an answer to this. You might have more than one answer to this, but what sort of profitability is the average MSP running? And I realize that's going to change based on the revenue band probably, but like on net profit, are you seeing common trends or standards that an MSP should be shooting for?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm in a relatively unique place because I get to see data on this on a quarterly basis. And, the average MSP actually does somewhere in the neighborhood of around 10% profit. And that's like the average. And then when we look at the data on EBIT, really we're talking about adjusted EBITDA, which has some kind of, adjustments to it, a little bit of nuance. But the interesting thing is that if you look at the top quartile, which is, what we call best in class, they're on average doing something like 2.3 times the EBITDA of the median, the average MSP. The bottom quartile, which, in any given room, there's always the top, the middle, and the bottom. And the bottom quartile is, some quarters losing money, but generally almost just breaking even. And so the interesting thing is, because you mentioned it depends on size. Well, what we find across the data is that it actually doesn't depend on size. In any given size band of MSP, there's always going to be the best in class, the median, and the bottom quartile. So no matter what size you are as an MSP, you have the opportunity to make best in class profit, which, by the way, last quarter was something like 22.8%. And this is all according to service leadership, by the way. But over the last many years, it hovers somewhere around 20%. When we look at many, many years, you're earning a lot more in profitability if you are in that best in class band. So what does good look like, right? Well, if I'm an MSP, I want to win. I want to be best in class, for goodness sake. And that 22-ish% is actually the midpoint of the top quartile. There's plenty of making a good bit more than that as well.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because for a couple of reasons. First of all, I talked to a lot of MSPs who just very clearly do not actually know the answer to that question. Because I'm like, what's your profit? And they're like, yeah, we run like 50%. I'm like, no, you don't.
No.
First of all, a lot of people just conflate markup and margin, and they use the number interchangeably, right? Which is not how division works. Like it's a division and a multiplication. It's literally the inverse of one another. The percentages are not the same. So 100% markup, 50% margin, right? Did I do that right?
You did it right.
So often those people are like, yeah, we're super, super, super profitable, blah, blah, blah. But then you go to be like, okay, well, we need to hire this person. And they're like, well, we can't afford it. It's like, well, which is it? Are you making money or you're not making money, right?
Yeah.
And let me ask this way. I mean, I think I already know the answer, but have you cross-examined that the profitability trends of MSPs against their average per seat price that they charge?
Well, that's a tough question, because when we look at per seat pricing, everybody means something a little bit different when they give an answer to that question. And you have a lot of things like, what market segment are you in? What does full managed services mean? Some people include projects in their managed services, right? And don't charge extra for projects. Other people include a full security stack, and some people don't. And so it's really tough to say, okay, here's the profitability per seat kind of a thing. But like looking anecdotally, and we do have data on pricing, which I won't share it in detail, but like anecdotally, when we look at MSPs, I don't see MSPs that are profitable charging any less than $100 per user for managed services. And I'll use the caveat of if you're including help desk. And actually, if you're including help desk, unlimited support, essentially, with a few exclusions here and there, it's very, very, very difficult to make money if you're charging $100 a user.
Yeah.
The ones that are making good money are usually in the neighborhood of between 160 to 200 plus per user of the MSPs that I see that are reporting a good amount of healthy profit, like the best in class ones that we're talking about. And plenty of them charge a heck of a lot more than that as well.
Right.
So,
and you mentioned, and I don't want to open a can of worms on the like adjusted EBITDA, but like I think a lot of times people will, an owner, if they're running an LLC or whatever, they will not include their draw or their salary as an operational expense, right? And that might be one of the things that's adjusted. Like, well, what does it cost to have an operator running the business versus you need to subtract an operator's expense if you're going to sell the business, because somebody has to replace you running that role, right? And they're not just taking the bottom line the way you do. You treat it sort of as this like porous bank account because it's all passed through anyway because you're a single member LLC or whatever. So that's probably one of the many adjustments, right? As well as some of like shared expenses, or like, hey, you write off part of your house and that's going to transfer over to an office or whatever, There's all that crap that I don't want to talk about. But I think a big part of what to me, one of the things that creates the most area of confusion when an MSP is comparing their quote unquote profitability to another is that sometimes they're using an adjusted EBITDA versus they're not using an adjusted EBITDA, right? They're not accounting for some of the things we're discussing. But the bottom line is, I was just talking to Ian Richardson and I were just texting about this the other day. He said, hey, what are you seeing for best in class for like per head price? And I was like, man, it changes a lot. In the UK too, the UK is like convinced you can't charge more than 50 to 100 pounds a user. And now a pound is different than a dollar, but it's also real kind of not,
for them,
it's still,
as much.
Yeah, like because their cost of living is considerably higher, but they have they have more value on their, I think a pound is worth more than a dollar. So, you know what I mean? Like, and if you go to South Africa, it's a totally different thing. In Trinidad, it's a totally different thing. In Canada, it's a totally different thing. Of course, I recognize that. But I see that people are charging somewhere between 75 and 275 a seat. Usually, right? Yep. And oftentimes like Microsoft licensing is totally excluded or it's a separate line item. Sometimes it isn't. So to your point, what is it per seat is totally different for every MSP. And so it's hard to get universal data. But the case in point, the thing I wanted to get to here is that I think oftentimes when we have a bottom line issue, we convince ourselves that we have a bottom line issue when we really have a top line issue. You're just charging as much as it costs to deliver the service. That's why you're not making money. And so then we fixate on over-engineering operational efficiency, when in reality, you can only spread somebody so far, you know?
Right.
You just have to, at some point, you have to pass the expenses to your business onto your customers. You have to charge enough money to be able to make money for your service. The end. And so if you're charging, if you're undercharging everybody else and that's how you think you're staying in business, it's actually what's literally putting you out of business, because we also have a variable cost business. We don't have a fixed cost business. The more managed service clients you bring on, the more staff you need, right? You have hard costs with every user, but you also have soft costs or absorb costs that cross across different clients. So you have to charge enough money to reach the next rung of the ladder of operational expenses, right? And so if you're like, man, I'm super slammed all the time, I don't have any profit, and everybody's working their ass off, the answer is you're not charging enough. That's the answer. Like most very often. Again, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, but I think that there's a lot of people out there trying to fixate on like, how do we get more efficient? And of course, that's a worthwhile and important pursuit. But in reality, if you just knew how to sell, there's that old adage, sales heals all wounds. You know, if you can sell a really high price and keep bringing on new clients, then you can kind of keep the pyramid scheme running. You know? You can outrun a lot of stupidity if you know how to sell. It will catch up to you eventually, but anyway, it solves a lot of those problems. I'm curious if you've seen, when you're talking about buying MSPs, what role did their revenue generation machine play in whether or not they were considered viable candidates, or even how they were valued?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think it definitely plays a part. When we look at valuation, we most often think EBITDA, right? And then you get some multiple of EBITDA. Well, yes, and there's a lot of factors that affect what that multiple is. Right. So one of the things that a lot of people consider as they're buying is what we call the rule of 40, which is essentially saying, hey, we want the total of your top line growth and your bottom line profit to equal 40, right? So if you're growing at 20% and per year and you have 20% profit, there you go. You got 40. If you're growing at 30% top line, but only have 10% profitability, I'm okay with that too. If you're growing at 10% to the top line and have 10% at the bottom line, your multiple is not going to be as good as somebody who has 20 and 20. And so it definitely plays a role in the math of all of this. Because, I mean, if I'm buying a company, I want to know that there's a sales engine running, that it's consistently adding net new revenue every single year, and that I'm going to be able to count on that in the future. And it's not just relying on one guy who may or may not stay, or who may or may not have been, or the company has just been like growing by default because the clients have been growing, for instance, right? So I'm going to look at that net new revenue generation, and is there an engine in place for that?
Right. I love that answer. That's the finance guy answer. Like, you just gave me the perfect spreadsheet answer of it is worth X amount of dollars. But you know, there's two types of value. There's financial value and there's strategic value to an acquisition, right? And of course, like, free cash flow is really what we're talking about, because when you're buying a business on an EBITDA multiple, sorry if this is getting too in the weeds to the listeners here, but this is fun to nerd out about. They love it. That's why they come here, to hear two Brians say a bunch of numbers. But if you're buying, think about it this way, right? Now, I'm the dumbest person to ever talk about this topic, so you fill in any cracks here, Brian, because you know you've forgotten more than I'm ever going to know on the topic. But if you're buying a business with an EBITDA multiple, that means you're saying, I'm going to give you, and let's use a number of, I'll just pick a number out of thin air and say 5. That's what you end up paying. 5x adjusted EBITDA, right? Like, I'm saying if nothing changes, I will break even on this acquisition in 5 years. Fair statement?
Okay. Yeah. Minus purchase costs and other things like that. But yeah, let's go with it.
I mean,
I'm following.
I'm following. For oversimplification, right?
Yeah.
If the cost of this free cash flow that I'm getting is this much money, and There's a lot of earnouts and seller financing and stuff in our industry, of course, depending on who's buying. If it's an MSP buying another MSP, they don't usually have a big pile of Saudi money that they're shelling out the way that PE firms do, right?
Yep.
So maybe there's this book called 12-Week MBA who has this amazing definition of value that I'm going to butcher, but when you place a value of a shareholder or a share price value, the value of a business is it's a discounted projection of its future revenues, and you discount it, right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I follow. Go ahead.
And of course, the discount that you would impute is determined based off of the risk factors of how likely the revenues are to continue, and what variables might impact gains or losses to the revenues in future against the revenues today. So if you have a machine, if you can show me that you've brought on 12 net new logos a year for the last 3 years, then I might not get to discount your future revenues as aggressively as if you showed me you've gotten 3 new clients in the last 3 years.
Right.
So because then you could actually, you could impute some of those projected net new revenues, because you're saying, no, I will get 10 new clients a year, period. And you could go for more dollars because you can essentially sell people the promise of future revenues that you haven't yet gained because you have a proven track record. At least you can pull the needle on the actual dollar amount forward, at least a little bit, right? An adjusted amount without saying, yeah, hey, pay me an extra $1 million because I got a killer sales guy. That's not what I'm talking about. You can actually prove and show this is what is happening. Look at all of the data in place. We have this revenue operations division that is creating organic revenue, and then we have this inside sales team that is expanding that revenue and sticking that revenue. That's how you get EBITDA multiples, is you can prove that revenue is not one-time revenue. You're going to keep getting it year over year.
Yeah.
Why are we saying all of this? That everything that imputes a higher valuation for your company are also things that will just frankly make you more money.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, it's true. Yeah. And when if you put yourself in that buyer's seat that you're talking about, right? Hey, as I'm running those numbers, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how much value is it going to generate over the next how many years? I'm discounting it based on time value of money and all the other things that you were just talking about. So I can actually, by the numbers, justify paying you more because of what you've been able to do in the past, and my belief that that's going to continue into the future.
Yeah. And
it's just a belief. It's a guess. But it's probably a pretty good guess if it's been happening for the last few years.
Right. Exactly. But I want to pivot a little bit and ask you some questions about, we're talking about pricing. I want to get into packaging and sort of offers a little bit, because I think this is, to me, probably the most important topic of conversation in the channel right now, in my opinion, is the actual architecture of the offer itself. I can get into the weeds of what my theories are, because I think, as I've said on the record many times, I think the MSP of the future will be a vCISO or will be not at all. I think vCISO right now is an amazing upsell, cross-sell to your existing clients who now have higher standards for like governance and compliance. But in the future, when managed services eventually actually means something, like when the way that CPA means something, you can't just like get a degree in economics and then put CPA after your name. Right.
Makes sense.
But today, you could just go to a Kaseya trade show with a credit card and then leave and put MSP on your website, and nobody can stop you, because it doesn't technically mean anything, right? It just means what we decide it means. In the future, when it means something, I think that the offer is going to be really, really critical. What I'm getting at is, you probably talk to a lot of MSPs and see what they're actually offering. What are some of the best practices you're seeing for MSPs who are succeeding, not only in bottom line success, but also in top line success, like they're selling well? How are they sort of positioning the offer of managed services?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it goes back to a little bit of what you were talking about earlier, right? There's multiple ways to price services, right? So you can go and find out what your competitors are charging and then say, well, the market is charging this. Here's what the market can bear, so I'm going to price like that. You can look at all of your costs that you have to deliver the service, including your people and your tools and everything else, and then say, well, I want to earn this percent of margin. So I don't even say the other M word. Yeah, I want to earn this amount of margin. And then you can price according to that, right? Well, those are two relatively immature ways of going about pricing your services. The best way of going about pricing is value-based pricing, right? Because I'm talking to a sophisticated buyer. And if I'm talking to a sophisticated buyer, they want outcomes, right? They have outcomes that they want to achieve. They want their business to grow. They want their infrastructure to run like clockwork. They want to know that they have a reasonable level of security for what they can afford. And they want to have a conversation about strategy as opposed to, the nuts and bolts of the firewall and that kind of a thing, right? And so if I'm talking to the right buyer and I'm having the right kind of value conversation, and I've heard you say this multiple times, you can be the most expensive person, and you probably should be the most expensive if you want to have that kind of weight when you go and talk to a buyer. And so I'm looking at, okay, how do I price it based on value? I'm probably not going to talk about per user pricing hardly ever in an initial sales conversation. I'm going to say, Mr. Customer, this is going to be somewhere during qualification. I'm going to say, hey, this is going to be somewhere between $7,500 and $10,000 a month. Does that fit within your budget, right? As opposed to, well, it's looking like it's going to be about $187.50 per user.
Yeah.
Well, what, do I have to do that math? No. I mean, so it's how you have the conversation strategically. It's how you present it, and generally speaking, save the per user for the back end or for a conversation between you and other MSPs.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So you're saying present one clean number with the full bill of outcomes rather than getting too into the nuts and bolts of how you came up with a number.
Correct. Yeah.
I like that.
And I think that stretches to, once again, a sophisticated buyer doesn't want to choose between good, better, or best. They want a strategic advisor who's going to say, hey, we've really thoroughly evaluated your environment and we understand your strategic goals as a company. And so us being the expert, we're saying, here's what you need. And I'm presenting them one thing. Now, am I going to say, hey, it's $10,000 a month, and for any additional users, we're going to add those on at $200 a user? Okay, sure. Yeah, sure. We can do, but I don't want to put on their bill. I don't want to put, 100 users at $200 per user on the bill. I want to have a number. And then you do all that other stuff on the back end of your PSA, for instance. But that's getting into a little bit of the weeds. But yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there.
I like this idea a lot of what you're talking about. I mean, if I were selling managed services still today, first of all, sometimes people have this conception that managed services, like that people don't buy managed services, or what am I trying to say? Let me say it this way. Again, what being an MSP means is not objective. Mm-hmm. It can actually be whatever you want. And as I said, I said on Jeffrey Newton's podcast, if nobody's buying your product, sell a better product.
Indeed.
And it's okay, well, they need network administration. They need firewall management. They need cybersecurity awareness training. Yeah, of course. But it's if I went into a gallery and I went to a painter and I said, I want a painting. Mm-hmm. And he goes, okay, cool. My standard rate is 14 cents per brushstroke, 3 brushstrokes for a quarter. It's going to come with 5 colors on the palette. It's an additional $150 per color I add to the palette. And if you want to pick the genre of the painting, that's $250. And then I charge per square inch of the canvas that you want. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, never mind. But you know what I mean? If he explained if he priced by the way he was going to deliver it, then I'm not interested anymore. Instead, he goes, what inspires you? I don't know. I love paintings of ships. Okay, this is the way that I paint. I'm an expressionist or I'm an impressionist. What kind of styles inspire you? And do you have any palettes? Is there a color palette in the space that you want this to sort of live with? Okay, great. It'll be $25,000.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And if you want a second one, if you don't like it, I'll repaint it for $12,000. But I get to keep the first one. And he's not going to charge you, this painter is not going to charge you based off of how he constructed the end result. He's going to ask a few questions about contextualizing the end result, like what room is it going in? So like what colors do you want? What inspires you? What genre are you motivated by? And then he's going to make a custom artwork for you, and he's going to charge an ass load of money because he gave you exactly what you wanted. Now, the truth is, the way that he painted, he could go and create almost the exact same painting for another person and charge whatever he wants to that person. So much like you, I didn't do 3 packages. To be honest, like I just don't actually agree with that way of pricing. I understand the merit of it because it's like, I understand the merit of price anchoring. I've got some problems fundamentally with being like, we're going to sell them a crappy version of what we do, what we want them to do, and then a version of what we do with a bunch of stuff they don't need. That's what good, better, best really ends up as, right? And then everybody keeps buying the good version, and then they're like, man, these guys, they're not security minded. They won't buy the security package. Well, then you should have put everything that they absolutely have to have in the good package. Mm-hmm. But then that goes to show, then what is the other crap that you're not including? If they needed it, it should be in the offer.
Right.
Imagine if you went to a restaurant and you said, I'll have the steak. And they go, great. Would you like a steak that's just cooked? Or would you like a steak that's seasoned? Because we'll charge you an extra $14 for the seasoning. And then if you want, you know what I mean? Like, no, why would you serve a crappy steak for less money? Why wouldn't you just serve a great steak for whatever it costs and whatever it's worth? That's my MO overall. So always been a fan of offering them one package, but then modularly building a custom, it's a tailor-made solution, but it's modular. You're not reinventing the wheel every single time. There's certain things you can plug in and out based off of what their needs are, their environment, their governing bodies, whatever, number of locations. So that's kind of how I always did it, is I would go in and they'd say, what's your price? I go, I don't know. I'm going to tailor make this to you. It usually ranges between, and then for a frame of reference, it's $125 to $300 per user per month is usually what it's going to end up at. How many people do you have? 15. Okay, it's going to be between this number and this number. They go, well, that's a big range. And I go, I know, I haven't done any of my discovery yet. So do you have your calendar handy? And then I would book the on-site consultation once I had created those bookends. And then later, when you price them within those bookends and they go, that's expensive, you say, what are you talking about? I told you what it was going to be. And then we did, and then you agreed to do all this work. So I don't know what you're basing that off of. Anyway, now we're getting into the tactics of selling the high price. But what you're saying is you're finding that MSPs who succeed financially are the ones who, can charge a lot for their services. But are you also seeing that there's trends in the way that they package? What makes these more profitable ones more profitable on the packaging or the offer building side?
I don't know that there's necessarily any trends at that point. So, I mean, if you get the pricing right, then what's left is to figure out to understand what your costs are to deliver it. And I find that this is one of the biggest problems that I see in MSPs that I first walk into, is that nobody can tell me their gross margin on services. And the reason is because they have this line on their P&L that's somewhere kind of down near the bottom. It's salaries. And it's salaries for everybody in the whole company, but they don't. And so they don't actually account for the salaries that are of the people who are delivering the service to determine what their actual margin is. So it's some unrealistic number. So, but at that point, it becomes about, managing efficiency and managing to what you can actually spend in order to deliver the service, pay for your sales, general, and admin expenses, and return 20% to the bottom line. And this is fun. This is like a really simple exercise. You ready? Mm-hmm. I make $1 in managed services. I can afford to spend 50 cents to deliver that service. Okay. And then what do I have? I have 50 cents of gross margin, right? If I have 50 cents of gross margin and I want 20% profit, I can afford to spend 30 cents on sales, general, and administrative expense. And then suddenly, like magic, I made 20% profit. But the problem is that most people don't understand what's in that 50 cents that it costs to deliver it. And ideally, it would be less than that. I'd rather have 60% margin on my managed services than 50%. Right. Because then I'd have some money to play with down below. But not understanding that basic math is one of the biggest problems that I see in MSPs that I first walk into.
Yeah. That's interesting. Let me ask you this question. Do you feel like a lot of MSPs are there for at least financially, over delivering?
Ooh,
are they
that's
spending too much money and energy obsessed with trying to offer the best possible thing, and they've left nothing left for sales, research and development, administration? I mean, are they over delivering their service?
I rarely see that being the problem. I see the problem being more, for lack of a better term, ignorance of what their true costs are to deliver the service. Because like you said earlier, I mean, who's the last MSP you talked to that's like, we have plenty of people, we're not that busy, we're doing really well, and we're making a lot of money? That nobody says that. Nobody's ever said, my gosh, my service team is like, we should probably get rid of some people because we just have, we don't have enough to do. It just doesn't happen in MSPs. And generally speaking, there are one or two that I've talked to that feel like that. But the essence of that is you've got to figure out how to be efficient enough with the resources that you have in order to deliver a good service, an excellent service to the client, and not be overwhelmed as well. And so that's the big part of the game, is understanding how much you can actually spend to deliver the service, and then becoming the most efficient that you can possibly be at it. And that gets into other things like making sure everybody's using the right tech stack and having the right conversations with the client so they actually do the projects that you recommend that they do, so that you don't have to spend as much time supporting them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very long tail to that conversation. But
right. And that's sort of like that's like an endless pursuit of mastery, right? In that regard, like how do you deliver managed services at scale? And that's where AI is becoming, that's really where people should be spending their AI brain power, right? It's like, how do we deliver maximum quality service and spread our resources farther, or increase your revenue per technician or users per technician, or whichever metric you use, right? But so there's that, obviously, like the goal being that if your gross margin is 90%, then there's a good chance that you're not potentially delivering a great product. Is that a fair statement? Or you just charge, or you're a sales genius and you're charging $1,000 a seat.
there would be that as well. I've never seen anyone's true gross margin that high. The usual explanation for it is they're not accounting for their costs in the appropriate way, and they're just calculating it wrong. But in theory, yes, if you're charging $1,000 a user, then sure, you could probably figure out a way to spend only $100 a user supporting them and make 90% margin, and that would be very nice.
Right, but so the reason I'm saying that is like when you're calculating CAC, customer acquisition cost, there are some general rules of thumb, and it changes by industry and all sorts of things. Like in SaaS, I think the average SaaS company probably definitely spends more on CAC than they do on service delivery.
Sure. Yep.
By a long shot, right? Because of the nature of, that's why SaaS businesses get 13x EBITDA, because you double click and you just launched a new client, you know?
Yeah. 13x revenue or more a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So their valuations are like make believe because of the strategic value and because of frankly, the really high cash flow. Once you build the infrastructure, it's really easy to add new clients. But for managed services, of course, it's a very complex service to deliver, and it requires expertise, and that expertise costs money. And it also requires a lot of data and visibility and tools that cost money per user, right? So we got to have a thick, really advanced stack. We got to have a really deep bench of experts who are managing these clients hands-on. That's the nature of the business we're in. But the reason I want to talk about this is if we're going back to your example of the dollar, the average, you got to consider what your customer acquisition cost is, because oftentimes, I think a lot, depending on who you ask, like people say the average cost to acquire a new MSP customer is $10,000 to $20,000. So if you've got a $2,500 a month client, that's probably a decent industry standard. That's $30K a year. I don't know what you're clearing on. Let's be generous. Let's say if you're in the top quartile, you're clearing $6,600 a year on that.
In profit, yeah.
In profit. Let's just say you're clearing $15K a year on that in gross profit.
Right.
So what I'm trying to get at is if you've got $1, you have to, how much of that dollar are you leaving to go get another dollar? Because if you're not charging enough money to have money left over to go find more money, then you will never have linear organic growth.
Right. Yep.
I think it's a fair statement, right?
Fair to say. Yeah. Yeah. And so oh, go ahead.
Well, I just, to finish the thought, we call it biz dev margin in Feel Good. How much are you marking up your product, your services to pay for your ability to develop more business, and also to have an R&D budget? Like, you got to go to conferences, you got to get certifications, you have to be researching AI. All the stuff to stay cutting edge costs money and time. And the way I write it in my book, shameless plug.
Oh my gosh. Look at that.
Have you seen this yet?
I don't even have my copy yet.
Oh man.
I thought you were going to send me one. Jeez.
I should. I know I should have. I should have sent you one. Like, good knowing you, Carl. Best. Anyway, The way I put it that way is, in order to be an MSP, you have to keep doing R&D. You have to keep evolving, honing your skills, learning new things, investigating new tools. Fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to be obsolete if you don't. Right.
Right. So that's essential. It's an essential part. Let's say it this way. That is an inherent cost to running an MSP, is spending money and time doing research and development. Also, if you want your MSP to be sellable at all, or if you ever want to make any money at it, you have to invest money to getting new clients. So you have to have, there are customer acquisition costs that are inherent to running an MSP. If you don't spend any money getting new clients, you will never get new clients. Therefore, those are hard costs. It costs you that money to deliver managed services. Now, that is not direct service delivery, but let's call that ancillary service delivery, because you can't keep good talent and pay for their certifications and give them raises and give them benefits if you don't have a revenue generation machine on the back end, which means you're going to eventually compromise the integrity of your service delivery if you do not have research development and customer acquisition. Are we fair so far?
Absolutely. Yes.
Therefore, if you are not charging enough money to cover your R&D and your customer acquisition, you are actually doing a disservice, not only to yourself, but literally to your current and future clients.
Couldn't have said it better. Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. And I think what a lot of times MSPs miss it on the pricing side of things. Then also they'll miss it on the gross margin side of things. And then they'll also miss it on not spending money to actually acquire clients. A, not spending money, or B, not spending any time doing it, and then wondering why they don't have any new clients knocking down their door.
They just throw money at it, right?
Yeah.
They'll just write a check to some other agency and then think that counts. And then they're always surprised when it doesn't work for some reason. But yeah, that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other story. But I think to your point, it's like, if you're doing it right and you're doing it profitably, there is room. Taking your example of a $2,500 a month contract, if you're doing it right, you should be earning $15,000 a year in gross margin. And over 3 years, if you're doing 3-year contracts, which you probably should, you're going to earn $45,000. So how much can you afford to spend to acquire that 45 grand? Well, probably more than you think, And so if you're not running those numbers and doing those numbers in your head, or, well, ideally on paper, you're just not going to know. And so you're always going to feel bad about spending money on sales and marketing and or spending your time, which is, again, probably the least leveraged thing for most MSP owners, is they just don't spend enough time doing it. and so, right. But I think it's a great point that you make, that, you got to understand those numbers and those economics.
And if you don't have the time, if you say, well, Brian, I couldn't possibly spend an hour a day working on business development because I'm so in the weeds on service delivery, that is another symptom probably of a pricing issue, right? If you cannot afford, like, if your time is the only thing that keeps this thing running, well, then you're trapped, aren't you? You're in a Chinese finger trap. Like, you can't get out of that. You have to charge enough money to pay other people for their time to deliver the service, so you have the bandwidth to be an executive. You have to spend your energy doing R&D and your energy at least managing your revenue operations,
right?
Being your sales and marketing, and of course managing your service delivery. It's easy to think about this in buckets when you get high enough where you have a director of service delivery, a director of sales and marketing, a CTO. But right now, you still have all those people. It's just that you are all of them. But they all still have a job, right? Like they all those responsibilities don't vanish simply because you're under $1 million in revenue. You still have the obligation to fulfill all those roles in the organization. Thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think this is actually a conversation I had last week with a client who was spending about 20% of their time doing server install projects. Or they are, like, actively. I said, why are you doing that? You're CEO of the company. Well, there's just nobody else to do it. You're telling me that there's nobody else in your company. Anyways, well, I won't go into the whole conversation. But here's the math, right? So let's take the same deal. You win a $2,500 a month deal. That's worth $45,000 over 3 years to you. How much time did you spend selling that deal? About 3 hours. Okay. Your time is worth $15,000 an hour. Do you think you could find somebody for less than that to do the server work?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what is not understood. I mean, by most MSP owners is what is the highest and best use, the most valuable use of your time. And a lot of times it's actually going out and finding business. It's almost always, unless you have a full sales team and you're CEO and all of that, but then you're not probably engaging in this particular conversation at this time, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I think where the mindset is off, is that you can't actually afford not to be spending time doing sales. And if it costs anywhere less than, let's say, $1,000 an hour to get somebody to do the thing that you think that you have to spend your time doing, well, go find somebody to do that.
Yeah.
So,
period.
There you go.
and frankly, and maybe then a lot of people tell me that they have a hard time finding technical talent. And I recognize every market is different on staffing and stuff, but IT has had a negative unemployment rate for like 20 years. Like, there are people who know how to plug in servers. There are a lot of them. And if you're not getting any of them, maybe you're not properly valuing how much, like, if it's worth $1,000 an hour for me to do something else, maybe it's worth giving them $10 an hour more than I'm trying to. Maybe they want $10 an hour more. Maybe it's worth it.
Yeah.
To pay them whatever it takes to get them to do the job.
Yep. And I will say this, like, it's to your point as well, the folks who are having a hard time finding people, well, let me just say this. I could introduce you to 4 people in the industry that have no trouble finding the right people for any of their clients, right? And by that, I'm talking about recruiters. They don't want to use recruiters usually, but there's a reason that they're good at what they do and a reason why they get paid well to do it. And so anyway, I'll leave that one there as well.
Right. Yeah, there are people. Yes, you can find people, and it's probably worth more money than you're admitting to get the right people in the right seats. If it means you get to put your energy on, as you put it, the highest and best use of your energy. I mean, I think this was a pretty solid rabbit-trailed masterclass through a way of thinking about the finances of the business. Because, you know, when we say sales don't really heal all wounds. Good sales heal all wounds. And if you keep bringing people on at a markup that you feel is right, but then a 50% markup, thinking that now you've got a 33% margin on that, right? So if you're trying to run a high gross margin, you need to charge enough money to be able to pay yourself and every division of your business to do their job. And then, of course, each of those divisions needs to be in the constant pursuit of getting more efficient at delivering their outcomes without having to spend more money, of course. But if you are running into some of these problems where you're feeling like there's a bottleneck somewhere and you either never have time or you never have any money, there's a good chance it's because you are not getting enough money for your time.
There's a great chance of that. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other sort of just Easter eggs here, just like words of wisdom? Let me say it this way. If there's an MSP who's here who like really wants to get their MSP ready to sell, or they really want to be ready to go buy an MSP. Let's start with the first one. They really want to get their MSP ready or at least able to sell. What's one thing you wish you knew that you know now that you wish you knew then for somebody trying to get to that position?
Yeah, I would say always keep it ready to sell, right? So a lot of people will say, hey, yeah, I know I'm not making that much in profit right now, but by the time I'm ready to sell, I'm going to start making more profit. That doesn't happen magically. If you think about, okay, well, what is all going to need to be in place by the time I sell? Do that now and don't wait to do it later, because you also don't know what could happen, right? I mean, you could die, and then your spouse is going to have to figure out how to try to sell this business that's not making much money. You don't want to do that. Right. In bonus, if you figure out how to be more profitable now, you're also going to make more money now and in the future when you go to sell it. So that's probably the biggest thing is figure out what the factors are that make a good business valuation, of a lot of which I could tell you. And the biggest one by far being adjusted EBITDA, and improve those. And your business is going to be better all around for it than if you decide that you're going to try to do that later on down the road.
That's good advice, man. Okay, how about this then? MSP who wants to buy another MSP. You probably evaluated a lot of packets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of that journey that you know now? Maybe even a hard lesson learned or something you absorbed somewhere along the way that would have helped you to know at the beginning?
Oh, there's so many lessons along the way. Yes, I've looked at dozens, if not well over 100 deals throughout my career for buying. You have to have a lot of spare time to do it. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to go buy companies, well, you're going to look at 20 deals before you find one that actually makes sense to do. And then maybe half the time they don't work out after you go to LOI. So you've got to have time and you've got to have funding. And if you haven't done it before, then you probably need somebody advising you on the buy side, because otherwise you're going to make some mistakes, and those mistakes can be very, very expensive.
I love it, man.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good place to end the interview, but I'm going to throw in one little bonus nug.
Ooh, all right.
One little nug that I'm thinking about right now. We're talking about profitability. A lot of people are, there's the what's this guy name wrote the like Profit First book, like whatever, check that, and then yeah. Food for thought. When you build a revenue operation machine, oh boy, this is going to turn into a long anecdote actually, but I think it's worth it. So I had an opportunity a few months ago to invest in a business, a small business. A friend of mine was going to buy from their employer. I had known the employer for many years. It's a flower business that was like theoretically profitable, but also very project based, and they did floral arrangements for like luxury weddings. So big, $20,000 to $50,000 floral arrangements, big weddings.
Okay.
In LA, that's a bigger deal, I guess. Anyway, I had this opportunity to basically I could have sunk $10,000 or $20,000 into this business to help them buy it. And I was running all the numbers. I was like, how much money would I make on this thing? And I realized as I did that, I went back to evaluate, well, what would I do? What would $10,000 in my business do? And my CAC to LTV ratio is depending on, I believe in like only truly equating fully absorbed CAC, equating sales salary and sales commission and marketing salary and marketing tool stack and advertising spend. Because if you're just looking at like one of those variables, then you get this like masturbatory figure that makes you sound better than you are, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, look, like the bottom line is the only line that you can write checks from,
Yeah.
So anyway, my LTV to CAC is over 5-1. So I have an under 20% CAC to LTV. That means if I spend $1 getting a customer, I will make $5 from it.
Yeah.
That's 500% return. Find me any other investment in the world that you can predict within 12 months a 500% return on your dollar.
There's not many out there. Yeah. So and so that would be the opportunity cost of you investing that $10K in your friend's business, right?
Right. So hey, I could make 30% a year on it and have an equity stake in this other business. It's like, that's worth nothing. Okay, I make $3,000 a year, so I get my money back in 4 years. Why would I do that when I could get 5 times my money back in 12 months in the business I already own? But it's because I have a revenue operations machine and I track the living daylights out of it. I know how much it costs me to get a customer. I just did an event, and in one day, I just told you before recording, like in one day, I got a 300% top line return. I mean, let's say gross margin, 325% return on that investment over the next 12 months in 1 day of sales.
Amazing.
So I'm going to do that event every year.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep doing more and more of those events. And that's where my money should go. And now that I have that, and I've got the free cash flow and stuff to be able to sustain the life of it, et cetera. Once you've got this revenue operations machine, then you know how much of that dollar that goes into the top of your business it's actually worth investing. And the reason I'm saying this, the reason I wanted this to be in this recording is, for me right now, business is growing, right? I just checked, I'm 150% year over year growth.
Amazing.
But my bottom line could be higher than it is now. Mm-hmm. If I was growing less fast. Mm-hmm. Like I could just keep, you see what I'm saying? Like I could pull the $25,000 I spent on that event in as profit and I could put it in my bank account. But I know if I don't pull the $25,000 and I put it in an event, then that $25,000 will become $125,000. So
sounds like a pretty good investment there.
Yes. So what I'm getting at is this profit first thing, don't get too fixated on your bottom line depending on your short-term goals. If you're trying to grow, if you really want to double in 3 years, then you probably shouldn't be pulling 30% out of this business. See what I mean?
Yeah.
You should leave 100%. It all in. Mm-hmm. If that's the goal. If the goal is get this thing bigger and bigger and bigger, and 30% of a watermelon is a lot bigger than 70% of a grape. So rather than just keep yanking all the money out of your business, if you have a revenue operations machine that can turn your dollar into more dollars, then I think it's worth considering. I'm taking all of the crops from this year and I'm sowing all of it back in. I'm letting it all go to seed, and I'm going to get a field that's 10 times bigger next harvest because I ate a little bit leaner this year. So that's all I wanted to say is keep in mind that the dollars that you spend on sales and marketing are going to turn into more dollars long run. So sometimes it might be worth keeping a little bit more of the money in as expenses if those expenses are guaranteeing future dollars, and your future top line revenue will be higher. And I don't know, anything to add to that? Like, do you feel like that's bad advice?
I don't. I think if all those things are true that you were saying, then it's perfect advice. The problem is that most MSPs haven't figured out what's actually going to generate them that new business. And so you got to figure it out. But once you figure it out, if you can find something that returns 5 to 1, then go all in, because then, as much as you can sustainably go on it, because that's what's actually going to grow your business. So, but I would say most MSPs haven't found that thing yet.
Yeah.
And that's why they don't do it, right? Because it's like, well, they feel like they're throwing money away. But you've got to, once again, you've got to invest the time and the energy and the money to figuring out how to do what Brian Gillette is doing with his business in your own business also.
Yeah. Mr. Hoppe, you really, every time I talk to you, I get more impressed by the stuff that you know. It's always really cool. I like that you bring such a human, and if I can say like a likability to the finance side of the business. And we didn't even talk about all the like executive coaching and all the stuff that you do as well. If people want to know more about you and what you're doing for MSPs, you want to just like give them a little blurb on what you do and how they can get a hold of you?
Oh, thanks so much. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, or I guess that's the best way to get in touch with me. So linkedin.com/in/Brian Hoppe. That's how you hit my profile. You can check it, or brianhoppe.com. But I'm spending a lot of my time working through a lot of these things with MSP owners on one-on-one basis, and really helping them, or sometimes one-on-two or one-on leadership team, as the case may be. So, that's how you can get a hold of me. I always respond to every message that I get on LinkedIn. So don't hesitate to shoot me a message, and always love to chat with anything MSP, with Brian Gillette or any MSP owner or anybody in the industry, really. So yeah.
Yeah, man. Brian Hoppe is a good hang, and he's a lot of help, and he's a lot of fun. So I encourage anybody to check him out. Brian, thank you we went super long today, and it really means a lot. Thanks for all the time.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Great conversation, man.